from the 36 chambers.
Yeah.
The fact that we're not seeing people in their emergency department now is because we realize, episode 1, we see a lot of people based on fear, ignorance, and convenience. Right now, we got fear driving. That's not gone, but some fear is appropriate. Fear is what helps us to survive, right? I ain't going down there, man. I'm not get shot. That's what keeps us alive. But it has to be metered. It has to be kind of appropriate. It has to be, you can't be afraid of everything. At the same time, fear does guide our survival mechanism as a individual and survival of the species too. So we're just telling, use your fear properly. And that can only be done with open, honest communication. We got to be transparent about what we're afraid of and why we're afraid of it, which is a nice segue to the clan in the front, our personal experiences. Let's talk about what are our personal fears. There are some things that we are experiencing, all 4 of us at this table, very differently. Although we are supposedly the same profession, how it affects us is very, very multidimensional. So guys, jump on it. How is this affecting each and every one of you?
I think all of us have a lot of fears in this, right? In healthcare, first and foremost, we're doctors, but we're also humans in general. We have our own things that we're basically trying to protect outside of the work. And that's why you see a lot of these things on social media say, hey, stay home. We're here because of, to help you guys, but please stay home for us, for healthcare providers, stay home. I think what my personal experience in terms of what I'm worried about, what I'm trying to protect is my wife. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm concerned about. And so I'm always very quiet about things. I kind of am not personal, but I think this is kind of to the point where it's kind of, you got to put that behind you, kind of be more honest as to, well, a lot of us are on the same boat here. And for me, my wife is, as of today, is 36 weeks pregnant, right? So we're almost there. Thank you so much. We're almost at the finish line. We're almost there. But the fear is with this going around. Like, this is such a beautiful thing to be able to have a baby. All I always kind of joke around, I always wanted to have a fly honey, have a kid, things like that. And I got that going right now, so super exciting times, but it just becomes scary. It's like, what's going on with I'm sorry, John.
But honey, he took it back to 1986.
I'm like, right. Who says fly honey? Like,
I do. Look, I watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air a lot, so that's where I get all these words from, so but anyway,
it all makes sense now.
Yeah, it does, right? Because I'm just like cornflake, but
okay, move on.
But I think for me the biggest concern is, like, I'm working, like I told you guys this before, the last week, like the last 2 weeks of March, I think 14 days, 10 of those I worked in the COVID pod, right? And so my exposure is so high. My fear is that what happens if I'm sick? The idea of my wife delivering alone is freaking me out a lot. Initially, our plan was to have family from New York and New Jersey to come down and help us out, but we're not having that at all because they're older. My dad has medical problems. My mom does. I don't want my mother-in-law to be exposed to any of this stuff. So we're not allowing them to come down. And this is the first child for us, right? If it was the 5th child, it's like, yeah, whatever. I can stay home. But this is the first one. I can't have my wife do this all on her own. And so to me, it is freaking me out that if I do get sick, what happens? Because we're almost there. We're a month away, right? Supposedly from the due date. So for me, this is what's freaking me out the most. And I remember so initially when I started the shifts, everything was pretty calm. I was discharging more people than I was admitting, but each day, like, people got sicker and sicker and sicker. And I think for me, things got real when I had to put a breathing tube on the first patient that was pretty sick. Like, her oxygen level was very low. She's very confused. And I knew that she wasn't gonna be able to breathe on her own. So that got real for me because now my face is right next to her face when I'm putting this breathing tube in. My exposure is super high now. But it sounds kind of sad. I am worried about this patient, but as I'm putting this tube down her throat, I'm thinking about my wife and my soon-to-be kid, right? So being worried about, hey, like, what if I get exposed to this? Am I going to make my family sick? And I think what scares us as doctors is that we still don't understand the disease. Like the public, we don't understand this disease. So I don't know how it's going to affect a pregnant woman. I don't know how it's going to affect a young child. So for me, that's what I'm trying to protect at the end of the day.
Just piggyback on that. Shout out to all the Corona mommies, because there's a lot of pregnant women right now that are like, all right, I'm about to do this. Like, you guys are going to be fine. You're going to do it. Your husbands, your partners, whoever. And even if you're doing it alone, we're strong. You can do it. And I'm, as the only female in the group, like, I feel for the women because another time where we have to step up and be strong. But I also want to put a little plug for the Corona brides. I am a Corona bride. And just having your, like, okay, so for example, my weddings were postponed and it's indefinite. And, you know, for myself, you know, you've put a lot of money into this, a lot of stress. Both families are invested in just having like this big thing that you've been planning for years, months, some of us, you know, being postponed indefinitely and not knowing when that's going to be has been very stressful. But the biggest thing that really bothers me about this disease is the loneliness. And I talked about the experience about coming into the ER and really like being alone from that time on. That's the thing that's really, really been bugging me. When I see a patient, I like to make a personal connection with that patient. I like to look at you. I like to see your face. I like to joke with you. But I have to come into the room with mask on, hat on, gloves on. You can't see my face. You can't see if I'm smiling. And then the same thing with the patient. We can't see their faces. And there's been a lot of times where I've been tempted to just, let me just see your face. I want to move the mask down because I want to see who I'm talking to and make sure that you're getting what it is that I'm saying. So a lot of times these patients, when they get very, very sick, no one's going into the room because we're limiting our exposure. So first of all, you're seeing a person who you don't know who they are because your face is covered, and then you're not seeing anyone for hours. And a lot of times patients are dying by themselves. So this is why this is such a novel and scary disease, because it's mirroring some of the old viruses and like stigmatized medical conditions that we've seen in the past, where everyone's afraid to touch or see or look or expose themselves. And the patients, it's a very, very lonely disease process. Also with people, a lot of the doctors are staying in hotels. A lot of doctors are staying in their houses by themselves because we're afraid to give the, you know, expose anyone to the things that we're experiencing at work. Everyone's lonely, you know, and we're doing our best to kind of self-quarantine and keep ourselves separate, but people are lonely. And I think that's the biggest thing that has stuck out for me with this whole thing is the loneliness that comes with it.
And I think one of the things that scares me too, Chitty, is I think patients who end up dying in the hospital, like it's a very lonely process that you don't have family there to be next to you. And just think about how many families can't even go through proper funeral arrangements, right? Can't do their rites of rituals, whatever they need to do to kind of help with whether it's for their faith or not. It's just, I think it's scary. I think you're very right. Like, I think the scariest thing about this is that we don't understand this disease.
You know, I think you guys said some really, really powerful things. You've humanized this. When you see things happen in mass, it's always a temptation to kind of depersonalize it. I think that's what the younger generation did when it seemed like only older people were getting it. I think that's what some people in the West were doing when they saw only people in China was getting it. But I like to think of health and global health as a train. And I said this in one of our unreleased podcasts, that when one car goes off the track, the whole train derails. That when you have one person that dies, a little bit of the entire society or community dies with that person. It doesn't have to be a famous person, doesn't have to be someone you know. And what this does, you're just pointing out, Jawad, is that it shows that death is something that is powerful no matter when it happens, who it happens to. We're just now all feeling it in ways that sometimes we've been insulated from feeling. Outside of COVID, we need to really kind of be empathetic to people who are dying alone, people who are suffering alone. This is a good way to remind us. I always like to pull the learning lesson or the silver lining out of this. So now when people have no one else there, I sit a little longer than I used to. I spend a little more time trying to get in contact. I spend a little time with the staff who took care of them because they're now that person's family. That's just me. I wasn't always like that. That was a learning lesson I had out of my loss. So hopefully we can learn from these losses too. I'm off the mic. Sorry about that. Get long. It's yours, Chris.
Yes, when I think about kind of the fear and anxiety it's causing, you know, personally and amongst physicians, you know, I was telling my wife last week is that this is truly the first time that I've seen doctors, physicians, nurses be afraid of something medical. I know, John, you've been doing this a little bit longer than us, and you've experienced a couple things that there was some anxiety, but in our young careers, this is the first time where like doctors, nurses are actually afraid. Now, part of that I think has to do with the PPE or the personal protective equipment. And I think what people don't realize from that standpoint is, we're getting a lot of recommendations from CDC and World Health Organization, but when it's coming down to a lot of these recommendations are really based on the resources that are available or lack of resources. A lot of these things like the mask, the N95, the respirator, we wear that for tuberculosis patients, before this started. And we've never heard of cleaning a mask or cleaning and reusing a mask, cleaning and reusing a gown. I don't know if that's safe. I don't think it's safe. We don't think this is safe, but if we're doing that out of necessity now because we don't have enough to take care of these people. So I think doctors and nurses are scared because we're doing all these things that are not really protecting us. And so, couple that with the fact that young people are getting this and becoming sick and dying, I think that's where a lot of the fear and anxiety is coming from.
Yeah.
I want to take a minute to just talk about this PPE because I don't feel safe in the PPE.
No, not at all.
PPE, personal protective equipment, whatever, is made for Black hair. Let's touch on that for a second because these helmets are so small. Like they look big to the average person, but they're so small. If you have a lot of hair, like I wear braids, twists. There's people who have locks. There's people who have afros. We have larger hair than the general public does. And so the PPEs, when the first time I put the helmet on, it was slanting to the side. I'm like, this can't be right. You know what I mean? And I'm like, so I personally don't feel as protected as I should feel in the PPE because I know it's not fit for my head. I have to do all sorts of contraptions with my hair just to get it onto my head. So that's another sign or source of fear for me because I'm like, am I really doing what I'm supposed to do with this PPE? Because it's surely not fitting on my head the way it's supposed to.
I have a lot of friends who are in New York hospitals, and their situation is just absolutely horrendous. Like they're completely decimated by this thing. And I know one of my friends who I'm going to give it a shout out to because I absolutely adore her and absolutely love her. She's a family medicine hospitalist at Montefiore. And she was telling me how, not at her hospital, but saying that how one of the other hospitals that's being crushed right now in Queens, like the residents are using one N95 mask, a respirator mask amongst themselves because they're so short. They're so short on masks. So that's awful, right? And so if that one resident gets COVID, they're not giving it to everybody else. Because think about it, you're breathing into that mask, right? You're coughing into that mask, whatever it could be. Now you're using it among that stuff. But that's what the situation is like. It's so different. I think it's night and day. I think at the moment, I'm not sure what Atlanta's going to be. Is it 2-3 weeks away from being in New York? I don't know. We can't predict this. But what New York is going through is absolutely insane and that's what's happening. A lot of healthcare workers are getting sick and are dying because of the lack of PPE at the moment.
Yeah, that's real. And here it goes, the richest nation in the world, and we're talking about supply shortages. We don't have the largest population in the world by any means. China does, India does. And so why are we behaving like this is a developing nation? And it's because, I'm going to say this has to be said, I'm going to get shot saying this, but it's because we
protect you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Protect you at all costs.
Yeah, they got my back. So seriously though, it's because we made healthcare a business first, not a public health institution, not a set of policies by which our number one priority was ensuring the overall health of the public. That was later kind of put in the back seat as a byproduct. We're going to make money first. Oh yeah, we're going to still kind of look after the public. When you stress a system or a situation, when you put stress on it, you find the weak points. You find out what was most important because that's the part that holds up. The profit is what we made most important. We took our eye off the true ball, which should be the overall health of your fellow man and the community as a whole. And to the degree, this is what's funny. We were talking about PPE. I got one mask that I had from literally H1N1. I lied to you not. I got a mask from H1N1. It's the one I threw up in the background picture that I remember going through a similar thing where people were not traveling and it wasn't as bad as this by any means. But I'm delivering stuff to my mom on a day where, she started having dizziness and she said her leg felt a little funny. And I'm literally holding up FaceTime on an iPhone to do a stroke assessment of my mom. What was really bad for me was that I felt that I'm in a situation where I'm not sure how much I trust the ability to go in and get the proper care. That's what I realized. I was balancing that in the back of my mind. I didn't tell my mom that right out there. Hey, mom, just go ahead. Any other day, I said, go ahead and go to the hospital and, they'll take good care of you. But because things have been strained to a certain degree and our focus has been just so swayed in one direction where if you don't have a cough and fever, you're going home, or we don't have enough stuff to keep the patients as well as our staff safe. It's this gamble that I'm like, or do I just keep my mom at home and do a stroke score, which is a way that we kind of assess who's truly having a stroke or not. I'm using FaceTime to do that. And that's a situation that I just think is uncomfortable. Sorry about that. I don't know if you heard that. That's just my doorbell. But anyway, that's what's real about this whole
Feds
situation.
watching, come and knock it.
Yeah, they come there like,
Feds knocking at your door already.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things I realized, I think again, this is very young in my career. This makes, including residency, is my 6th year doing this. So I've never experienced something like this, but I think a lot of the things that were issues of healthcare, I think are coming to light now because of this coronavirus situation. I think a lot of things, and I think we're kind of seeing that maybe American capitalism isn't the way to go, that there is this huge disparity, or how is the nation that spends the most on healthcare not have any resources? Like I was saying, my friend who's the hospitalist said that I was just texting her a few days ago, she's in the COVID unit, and she said there's a young guy that needs to be intubated, but they're doing high flow nasal cannula, which is basically means you put the little, you see in the movies with the little prongs that go into the nose, but they're putting so much oxygen through there because they had no vents. They had no vents to use at all in that hospital. So they were doing whatever they could to buy some time before they can even do that. I mean, when can you imagine that happening in the United States? But you can see what our shortcomings, even though we spend so much money on this and people are saying we have the best healthcare system, but tell me, do we really, if we're struggling so hard just to keep people alive and to protect our own staff?
And there's a lot of things that are happening right now that we never thought would happen, especially practicing in the United States, which is supposed to be so resourceful. So I think that's another thing that adds to the fear with us working every single day, sharing masks, using the same mask for the whole time. Like, these are problematic things. And we're just hoping that this doesn't escalate to the point where things are getting even worse. So as physicians, we're scared. I know the public is scared, but we're going to do our best to, learn more about this thing every single day. This is a very exciting time in medicine, as much as it's very scary and there's a lot of unknown. It's a very exciting time, and I'm a nerd, so I'm like, okay, what are we doing here? What's happening in the body? Because this thing is acting like something that we've never seen. It's hitting several different organs in the body, and it's exciting because it's kind of like, wow, I'm learning new things every day about how this disease is working. So my brain and the nerdy side of me is like, oh yeah, I'm loving every part of it. But at the same time, it's like, okay, people are dying. We're not safe at work. We're not safe at home. It's really something that's pretty remarkable at this point.
As you guys know, I'm from Detroit, and Detroit is certainly becoming a hot spot. I watched my Facebook timeline, a couple of weeks ago, go from, a lot of friends and former friends and classmates, making a lot of statuses, not taking it seriously. This is just a joke. This is the government trying to control us, and I'm just still going to do what I'm going to do. And then fast forward 2 weeks, and it's sad. Like, the timeline is now full of rest in peace to my family member, rest in peace to my friend. Please pray for my aunt. Please pray for my 30-year-old friend that's in the ICU on a ventilator. And it's sad. I have multiple family members at this point that have tested positive. A lot of them are trying to tough it out at home, some of which are in the hospital. One's in the ICU, and then living in a home with, 2 physicians. My wife is a physician, and she's still going to work. My fear, in myself is not that I get sick and that I die. My fear is that I get it and then I pass it on to my kids. My kids pass it on to my parents. My parents get sick. I'm at peace with my mortality. Like, I work in the ER, like, we know life and death. We know that any given moment can be our time. And I'm at peace with that, but I'm not at peace with my kids, losing their father, my wife, losing their husband, my mom, bearing their son. And so this is all very real and very personal to all of us.